Alright, so I'm sure you've probably heard about this pervert game by now. Me though, I didn't know this game existed until recently. You see, I am very much an enjoyer of hardcore PC gaming. So it's led my PS5 to become a machine that turns dust into a collection of dust. I didn't have a joke for that, I just winged it. But then I heard about a PS5 exclusive that people were comparing to Nier Automata, which just so happens to be my favorite video game of all time. So my curiosity was immediately piqued, and I decided to pick up the game. And now that I've spent several hours with the characters, the world, and the story, I want to talk about it, especially since so much of the conversation has been leaning towards the silly side. So I want to talk about the other aspects of Stellar Blade that aren't being discussed as much, tell you about the fun gameplay, the rich design, and the beautiful soundtrack, and in the process, maybe convince you to give Stellar Blade a try. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, Stellar Blade is the first major release by Shift Up, the studio known for making those mobile games. Probably the most infamous example is the very popular Nike, the Goddess of Victory, a game that treats body physics like you treat your balls. I'd say you probably haven't heard about this game before, but just look at you, of course you have. I had the bright idea to give it a shot and see what it was like, and I mean, it's pretty much what you'd expect. Not a whole lot of game, but baps as far as the eye can see. The company's CEO, Kim Hyung-tae, is a highly talented character artist who has been in the industry for a long time, being most widely known for his work in the Magna Carta series and Blade and Souls. And yeah, I can definitely see the connection. That said, I really like the design language, color, and dynamics his works offer. Anything he comes up with just seems to ooze personality while also asking you, hey, do you like engorged mammary glands? There's this one YouTuber by the name of Namukir who made a video on Kim's art, breaking down his style and explaining why it works in a way better than I could ever hope to do. So I highly recommend checking it out. But the takeaway is that this same design language was a big part of what made people interested in the game when it was first shown off as Project Eve. Since then, Shift Up has also made sure to advertise that they brought together the world's leading scientific minds to construct jiggle physics that would make Dead or Alive extreme blush. It's the kind of game you play with the word heaving always in the back of your mind. It brings me back to when Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 had that one gimmick of shaking your controller up and down to do that. And needless to say, that kind of thing today sparked a fair bit of controversy, many criticizing the game for making Eve needlessly sexualized, but more on that later. I bring this all up to say that this made a lot of buzz for the game, and it made something that probably would have flown under the radar instead become an immediate bestseller. I mean, all this controversy is how I found out about the game in the first place. But now comes the question of whether this game has more to it than just revealing outfits and jiggle physics. Well, after putting my fair share of time into this game, I can tell you, I actually really enjoyed it. Stellar Blade is not afraid to admit how inspired it is by all these excellent properties. Think Nier Automata, Alita Battle Angel, Sekiro, Bayonetta, Dark Souls, God of War, Devil May Cry, and Blade Runner. Hell, I even felt a hint of Ghost in the Shell by the end there. And it's concerning to hear that because it's pretty common for properties that have so many inspirations like this to just end up becoming a whole value version of those inspirations. Thankfully though, this is something that the game uses to its advantage, using these pieces to elevate a foundation that stands strong as is, at least in my opinion. Which is great because, as much as I love Nier Automata, if I just wanted to play that game again, I'd go play that game again. And believe me, I do. Often. I'm sure I'll make a video on it someday. But back to what we're supposed to be talking about. I think it took me by surprise how much work it feels like went into Stellar Blade. There are a lot of systems here that take those inspirations and mold them into their own thing. And if there's one place where that's especially true, it's definitely the gameplay. But let me tell you, when I first saw this game, I was not expecting the combat to be as intricate as it is. Stellar Blade takes a fascinating approach by having the kind of hack and slash combat you'd see in like Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, and pairs it with the difficulty of a Souls game. Seriously, once the training wheels are off, this game is not afraid to kick your ass. The game will regularly check you to see if you you're learning its systems by putting you into fights where you will not win without them. And sometimes it will check you for getting a little too comfortable with them too. It is a vicious cycle. That said, there's a surprising amount of depth to the combat. The very first thing you will want to learn is how to perform perfect dodges and parries. Seriously, without these, you are fucked! They are your gate to performing high damage counters, building meters, and breaking your enemy's stance. Which I find this cool because it gives you something to work on with every enemy you fight. It's one of those easy to learn but difficult to master kind of deals, especially since none of the enemy types have the same attack patterns, each with multiple different patterns to learn. The only problem is, I really suck at video games, so I am fighting for my life against these things, often spending an embarrassing amount of time against these bosses. I'm the kind of player who has to get so intensely focused on these things that you could see the drool dribbling down my chin if you watched me. But when you can hit those parries and follow up on that with a devastating combo, the feeling you get is just so good. It also helps that the bosses here are the perfect blend of both challenge and fun. Probably my favorite boss is Belial in the orbital elevator stage. It just sticks out to me because of how much you had to try and adapt to each other's changing move pools. It was a dance where you both tried to outmaneuver each other, and it made that fight an absolute blast. That said, the last 3 boss fights of this game are hard as balls. It legitimately took me about an hour each to beat them. I remember whimpering in silence at the sight of a screen that told me, "You died, you are dead," over and over again. Like, gee, thanks. I almost didn't realize that I died. Aside from that, the combat itself is just so fluid. Every attack moves seamlessly to the next, and it's an absolute dream. There's just some sort of power fantasy that's awakened in me when I can go from a perfect parry to a counter chain. Then just top it off with a Tempest because it looks sick. Next, I want to move on to the design of Stellar Blade, because it's undoubtedly one of the strongest points it has going for it. Considering the laundry list of inspirations I mentioned before, it's impressive how this game has its own distinct personality and flair. For example, let's look at the enemy faction. For the Naytiba, Shift Up had a helping hand from Jong Hee Chol. Sorry for the pronunciation, I already know I got that wrong. The same man responsible for the freakish design of the monster from Bong Joon-ho's The Host. And yeah, that definitely checks out. I also wouldn't be too surprised if the game drew inspiration from games like Resident Evil or Dead Space for some of the more common enemies. But then you get to those insane boss designs. Whenever I first saw Abaddon, Gygus, or Corruptor, it made me stop in the middle of my tracks and go, what the f is that? I'm also a pretty big fan of the character designs. Needless to say, Eve is already pretty recognizable. She's got this sleek yet simple enough design that makes her feel different from your Bayonettas or your 2Bs. Things like that emerald green attire, the longest ponytail you've ever seen in your life, and the cool looking sword that she pulls out of the back of her head all come together to make an interesting package. I'm not sure if this is just me, but Lily might be the odd one out here. Every time I saw her, all I could think was how it looked like Shift Up accidentally took a character model from Kingdom Hearts 4 and gave her insane jiggle physics. One of the designs that caught my eye in all the marketing material was Oracle's. Half wise old man, half Iron Man. I feel like he's a perfect blend of both grime and cyberpunk that they were gunning for. And then there's Adam, who stands out despite not being anything special design-wise. Maybe it's because he looks a lot like somebody who you'd expect for a person who lives in this world and can survive in it. He's also quite handsome, so he's got that going for him. Speaking of the world, I need to talk about that too. There's no bigger shame than when you play a game with a super expansive world full of secrets and goodies, but nobody cares enough to explore it. So I love it when games like this incentivize me to dig through every inch of a map, rewarding you with both upgrade items and cosmetics like costumes and drones. And I'm well aware that many people playing this game are dogs, so those costumes are incentive enough. Side note here, but even though there were horny costumes aplenty, my personal favorite costume was definitely the Wasteland Adventurer. I honestly wish that this was her default costume because it just looks so right. But anyway, this actually leads to an interesting consequence too. In collecting all this stuff, you also have these moments where you find yourself in desolate areas that leave you filled with questions, making you wonder what it is that happened here and why. The game often sprinkles just enough bits of lore to get an idea, but leaves out enough to give you room for interpretation. It's a small thing, but it helps me feel more invested in these places that otherwise might not be all that interesting. Let me give you my favorite example. Despite Edo 7 being the very first level, it's the one that feels the most full and fleshed out to me. It creates this setting you want to explore and engage with, but not without recognizing that danger is always around the corner. And I mean that quite literally. These assholes will actually kill you from around a corner. This would be an achievement for most games, but Stellar Blade takes it one step further. After your initial playthrough of this level, you're given a new side quest, one where you're given a code to open up the flooded sector, giving you a whole new area you didn't have before. And at the bottom of this sector is a hidden room, one that paints a sinister ploy to cover up the murders of these sentinels by somebody like you, planting the seed for a future twist while breathing more narrative into the world and explaining why it's designed the way it is. And that is world building right there. I've got to shout out Lee Ji-yeon, the level designer for Stellar Blade, for doing such an incredible job. I can only imagine how difficult it must be to make something this intricate while also making it fun. Not to mention, this is supposedly the first AAA game she's ever worked on, and that is downright amazing. Admittedly though, not much else in the game ever gets quite as intricate as that. However, there's still so much baked in that it's still impressive overall. If this game has one other big plus, it's the soundtrack. Oh my god, is it great. When I downloaded this game, the icon on my PlayStation home screen started playing this absurdly beautiful piano ballad that let me know, oh yeah, I'm in for a good time. The Edo 7 overworld theme is so unbelievably catchy that it has become the track that I've been listening to the entire time I've been writing the script for this video. Knowing me, it is probably what I'm listening to while I'm editing the video too. The OST just has this way of gripping you, beautifully complementing the world around you while also immersing you further in it. It's the kind of music that makes you take a breather from being shit-stomped for a little while and just take in the scenery. Speaking of which, if I'm gonna be talking about the atmosphere that these tracks make, then I need to talk about Everglow. Here's some context real quick. The orbital elevator is an old sector that once offered people a way to travel to space. A place symbolic of human progression regressed with the infestation of the nightmarish Naytiba. Only the Naytiba here are different. Before, all you had faced were these mindless beasts, but here, they've become these disturbing amalgamations of flesh and machine. And worse still, these creatures see you as their prey. They scout you out and they hunt you down, waiting for your most vulnerable moment to pounce and attack. Needless to say, this level is tough. And by the time you reach this sleep paralysis demon, you are tired. You've gone through the gauntlet at this point. It's just been one boss after the other. But you decide to push through anyway because you know you're right there at the end. And you make your way to face the challenge that stands between you and that level's final boss. Along the way though, the game decides to give you this little moment. This brief respite on the orbital elevator where you're just looking through it and see the Earth. Only, it's not the desolate wasteland you've seen it as for all this time. Instead, you get to see an entirely new side of it, this shining blue pearl in all its majesty. And as you're taking it all in, this happens.
So close to the goal.
This is easily one of my favorite moments in the game because of the excellent use of music here. Then you got loads of other great tracks like Taki's theme, Camp, and Star Descent. Listen, do you have all day? Because I could go on. And I will. Pardon my language, but those boss fight themes are freaking epic. The mere sight of the Juggernaut is enough to make a grown man shit his pants. But add on that insane theme of his, oh boy, let me tell you, Diarrhea City. They really captured the essence of,
I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
Then there's that one theme by the end that sounds way different than anything else in the game. It's like they leaned into more of a K-pop sound, making the fight feel super energetic and lively. And then it just gets to this part where it Plus, it gets more intense and aggressive as the fight continues, which is pretty appropriate because this boss fight is absolutely brutal. So I got pretty familiar with it in the hour plus I spent listening to it, trying not to throw my controller across the room. You died, you're dead, oh god. And then the final boss theme? Man, Shift Up really said, I hope you like the feeling of staring down the barrel of impending doom because God is about to step on you like the cockroach you are. Now beg for forgiveness, you worm. Bro, it even takes the motif from the main theme. I love it when soundtracks do that. It's all super diverse, and that extra flavor this game likes to sprinkle in occasionally makes me like it all the more. Considering all the praise I'm giving the soundtrack for this game, I'm sure it'll come as no surprise to hear that Monaka Studios was involved in the process, which just so happens to be the same music studio behind the Nier games. Also, the theme song for Sekirei, apparently? Listen, if you don't know what that is, it's probably for the best that you keep it that way. Lastly, for this section, quick shouts to the sound design. You can tell that a dedicated team poured a lot of time and attention into ensuring you felt immersed in this world through sound, especially with the sound of a perfect parry. That is one of the meatiest bits of audio I think I've ever heard. Like, it's approaching Berserk 2016 levels. It's that crazy. But now we get to the point where we talk about some of the game's shortcomings. Unfortunately, the area of improvement I want to see the most has to be the story. Don't get me wrong, this is a perfectly serviceable story that holds your attention well enough. However, it never really felt like it pushed itself far enough. It never hit any emotional peak for me and left me craving for more. Things happen that get you from one objective to the next with little build to the connective tissue between. It isn't uncommon for some big story beat to happen, only for the story to move on to the next thing. It feels pretty clumsy sometimes. Kind of like they knew what beats they wanted to hit, but didn't really know how to piece it together cohesively. And part of the reason this happens too is because of our characters. Unfortunately, they feel pretty underdeveloped and have almost no personality. You don't really know anything about them beyond their objectives and some hints of morality. And where you'd think that personality would slowly build up with the story, nothing really develops. Which kind of sucks because there are moments in the story where these characters have their ideals challenged. These moments clearly meant to put meat on the bones of these characters, but failed to. One of the final moments of this game, however, does give you an important decision that affects the ending you get. So it's not all for naught. There is a silver lining, and it is a pretty cool one. I honestly wish they took the opportunity to branch out these decisions earlier in the game, or even, maybe I'm being hopeful here, some kind of change to the gameplay. This game's pacing is also a little wonky because I thought I was halfway through it and then it went into maximum overdrive. This may have been for the best though, mainly because the formula the game had of hunt Alpha Natiba, find Hypercell was just starting to feel a little tedious, especially since two of the open areas in the wasteland and the desert felt a little too similar to my liking. I honestly wish they replaced the desert area with Eidos 9, mainly because that's where the game decided to flex some creative ideas that spiced up the gameplay a little bit. Most of the side quests also didn't do much for me, but there is one side quest storyline that I wanted to mention because it might be the most emotional content the game has to offer. The Beyond Fate storyline in this game is pretty damn compelling and, personally, one of my favorite bits of the game. It follows the story of Sue and Enya. Sue is the bartender of The Last Gulp who protects Enya, a girl who is more machine than human in her current state, being barely functional aside from being able to sing one song. This is a clear point of distress for Sue, who wants a better life for her, but also doesn't have the means to provide for her in the harsh walls of Zion. Another trait he carries is his distrust for the so-called angels like Eve, but he casts aside all that prejudice because she might be able to help Enya in a way that he never could. With the help of Lily, Enya becomes operational again, bringing her one step closer to being the person that she was. Although there was still one thing missing, her ability to walk. So Sue decides to take things into his own hands. The only problem is that his pursuit takes him to the dangerous wasteland, an area already crowded with the remains of sentinels slaughtered at the hands of the Natiba who roam there. But he goes regardless, deciding any risk is worth it so long as he can provide for Enya. Against all the odds though, he finds the parts he needs. However, he is injured and unable to return without our help. Enya is none too happy about Sue nearly throwing his life away, but appreciates the gesture nonetheless. And then the last piece of the puzzle falls back to you. Enya can walk, but still has no memories of her past. So you're tasked with going out to the desert to learn about her identity. And all the signs direct you toward an old opera house, one where you find out that she had a role in it, singing a song titled Beyond Fate, the very same song she sang before when it was all she had. With that mystery solved, Enya feels like she can finally move on with her life. Her token of appreciation being her singing Beyond Fate for you and Sue in the bar one last time. And narratively, this is all great. We can invest in some characters, we watch them face and overcome struggles, and grow as people. And this is the kind of thing that the story really needed. Kim Hyung-tae talked about what he wanted the player to take away from the story, and what kind of questions he wanted to present with it. The narrative focus is on you contemplating the implications this world sets up. The game will ask you things like, what would the world look like without humans? What is humanity? And could humanity be replaced? And believe me, I love it when my media haunts my psyche with deep existential crises. I mean, just look at the media I talk about on my channel and it's pretty obvious. Although, I think it's crucial that it be the subtext of the main narrative, because neither the characters nor the story have the necessary nuance to invest me in these questions. It was only a matter of time before I brought it up, but this is something that Nier Automata does so well by forcing you to make decisions that question your morality. It almost interrogates your mindset and asks you how much you really understand your beliefs. And if Shift Up can capture anything close to that feeling in a Stellar Blade sequel or an entirely different product, it would go a long way toward making the narrative just that much more compelling. Alright, now for some other things real quick. As an aspiring voice actor, this one kind of sucks to critique, but I do have to mention it. I really wish I played this game in the original Korean dub. The English dub is by no means poorly acted, but there seemed to be some kind of disconnect that made the dialogue sound flat. Characters will often deliver these critical lines and just sound emotionless while doing so.
Enya, are you alright? Enya.
If I had to guess, this is more of a direction issue where the actors may not have had the proper context. This is total speculation on my end, but it did impact my investment just a little. I'm also going to make a recommendation here and say that the platforming stuff, maybe let's just not next time. There were points when I felt Stellar Blade wanted to diversify the gameplay when it wasn't all that necessary, especially when I found it to be more frustrating than anything here. Trying to jump on a tiny platform while actively avoiding making Eve accidentally dash and plummet to her death was beyond frustrating, forcing me to halt myself to a total stop for several minutes on end when I want to be exploring the world and taking out these big pigs isn't the best feeling. This one is very much a nitpick though, because I won't sit here and pretend that it's a big part of the game. There are only a few times when you have to do it, but it's just not fun whenever you do. In conclusion though, I feel this game has a ton of merit that mitigates many of those negatives. Enough to say that it has my recommendation as a game you should consider picking up. It's not very often that a game makes me want to start a new playthrough almost immediately after finishing it, but this game did that. However, the fact that I learned that there is a hard mode you unlock after beating it made me fear for my life. My brother in Christ, I thought that was the hard mode. I'm very hopeful that this will soon get a PC release so I can play it again and take my time with it. For as much exploring as I did, there's still so much more I know I could have done. Also, I really just want to master the game mechanics so I can go back and absolutely destroy those last 3 bosses for all the heartache they gave me. I will make them suffer like they made me suffer. But I really hope that once the dust settles and the controversy around this game dies down, people will look back on it as the simply fun game that it is. I put up a community post asking those of you who played it what you thought about it, and it seems like many of you share a similar thought process to what I believe. If not, praise it even more for the gameplay and the story. And mad props to you all for being that mature. I really respect it. The game has already been massively successful in the short time it's been out, having crossed the 1 million sales milestones and getting a seal of approval from Yoko Taro. Look, he's even wearing the meal head and everything. So here's to hoping that Shift Up can take all the feedback they've been getting and come out with a game that is truly a cut above the breast. Yeah, no, I shouldn't have done that. Nah, that wasn't good.
Fight for what's right.
For my rights.
And I will not have sex.
You don't have sex.
No, you won't.